Welcome to the Freight Project podcast, brought to you by Cerasis, a North American third-party logistics company providing shippers transportation management technology and solutions.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Freight Project podcast. On today's podcast episode, Cerasis welcomes John Monarch, CEO of ShipChain, a burgeoning blockchain shipping platform. You'll get to learn about John's background in computer science and physics at Clemson University, his influences from his father who worked in the trucking industry, and John's experience in building his own fulfillment company that led to frustrations not knowing at any time where a missing ocean freight shipment might be, which led to his founding of ShipChain. On this episode, John will share more about ShipChain and offer a few pragmatic and practical benefits of using blockchain in supply chain and logistics. John and I then discuss of all the players in the supply chain, 3PLs, forwarders, carriers, and shippers, who will benefit the most from the application of blockchain in shipping and freight, and where we are as an industry in our general understanding of the realities of blockchain. John then gives a realistic view of the maturity of the blockchain market as applies to shipping and freight. And finally, John will discuss how he sees the role of integration between blockchain platforms and existing supply chain systems, as well as helping the audience understand the differences between a public blockchain platform and a private one, as well as which might be the more beneficial for the industry at large. We hope you enjoy this episode of the Freight Project podcast. Hi, John. It's great to have you on as a first-time guest of the Freight Project podcast. As with all of our first-time guests, can you first share a little bit about yourself and the company you're CEO for, an exciting blockchain-based shipping platform, ShipChain?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. So my background's a bit of a non-conventional one. I went to college for physics. I went to Clemson University, and a lot of people are familiar with us for a couple of national championships in the past few years, so that's nice. But I went for physics. I minored in computer science. Ended up working in fulfillment, specifically owning a fulfillment company. And that's where I kind of got the crash course of how the supply chain worked. Like I had always kind of seen it from third party. My dad was involved in a trucking company very early on. So I'd kind of like known a bit about it, but never really had firsthand experience and learned the hard way. About all the problems that are facing the space. And that one day I was just complaining about one of the, a shipment that had disappeared to my now partners, some friends of mine. And it kind of spawned the idea for ShipChain, which has been to provide a lot of visibility and universal track and trace and just much more accountability with that underlying blockchain layer on things.
Well, you mentioned national championships. It's been a while for my great Longhorns, of course. And the joke around my house with my wife is the 2 times she was pregnant with our children, the Longhorns went to the national championship. So I was thinking about having maybe 18 or 19 children, but she was not on board with that. So Dabo Sweeney is bringing Clemson back to greatness. And I can only hope that Tom Herman over at the University of Texas does the same. And I think we're trending towards that line. So perhaps, John, we might have a big bet in the future, Clemson versus Texas. You never know.
Hey, it'd be great.
So, yeah, it would be. But thanks for coming on and telling us a little bit about yourself. So let's get right into the meat of it. You've started ShipChain because you identified some problems in the freight industry. And, you're applying some really innovative solutions, to help improve that visibility, born out of the true frustrations and that all shippers kind of face. And so I think let's first start at a high level. What are some of the benefits of blockchain for the freight industry?
Well, there's that accountability layer. So what I noticed in my experience is that most of the issues that occur in shipments where there's any sort of a problem or a hang up, it's where there's a transition, where there's a handshake. No one seems to be upset when something's on a ship or when it's actually moving on a plane. It's when it's handed off to another company or another person. And being able to validate, who actually is in control of the product, for instance, at that time or the shipment, is critical. And because right now, and having that problem that I faced that I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of finger pointing. There was a lot of, well, it's not my fault. We got rid of it. It's, we don't know where it happened. Not our problem anymore. Go after the forwarder, go after the shipper, go after the carrier, and so being able to prove accountability not only will help the shippers and receivers in the long run, but at the same time, it'll help remove a lot of that liability from parties that don't need it. So necessarily reducing things like insurance premiums.
Well, it's kind of like that meme that's out there where you see the two Spider-Mans pointing at each other. That's kind of like all the parties. It's like, who to blame? Come on, guys. We're all on the same team here. Let's get along. And, we're really coming into this great age where, shippers are trying to get shipper of choice status. Carriers themselves now are, doing away with things like deficit ratings, and they're trying to understand their own profitability. And they're working, frankly, more often with, third-party logistics players, but also freight forwarders and shippers. And the big buzz around now is that word collaboration. And so I think, when it comes to these advanced technologies, I think we've really stopped thinking about who is this best for. And blockchain really takes that spirit of collaboration, I think, to the next level. So out of all of those players in the supply chain, who really benefits the most?
Honestly, I'd say really everyone, but in the end, the consumer is who we need to focus on it benefiting the most. So you have to think about it. A lot of the technology that was previously made in this industry was either designed by engineers after someone in shipping told them how it should work, or there were, the early stages of a lot of this modern technology coming into it. There were a lot of tech people that had no experience in the industry, trying to come in and say, look, I can solve all of your problems without ever knowing how those problems actually work. So now you've got this new generation of people that have worked in shipping that also understand the technology side of things and are able to really, critically put things together and be like, all right, I've seen these issues. I know how we can solve it. We don't have to apply, the Band-Aids in the wrong places like we have been doing in the past. And it needs to be something that people can actually use. Because what good is software if, it's just not going to be used? Everyone pays for all this software as a service, for instance, that you just forget about and let run up the bill every month. That's not what we want.
Well, when it comes to that adoption, we all get excited about shiny objects, and I would say that shippers tend to be more hesitant to adopt technology, maybe because they're operations minded and they might be skeptical to something like a silver bullet to solve all of their problems. And, there is no silver bullet technology that exists anywhere. But when it comes to blockchain, people seem to be really excited about it. But where are we in terms of market maturity? Everyone's talking about it, but what about actual use cases and implementation?
We're very early. I mean, it's still a super immature technology and market. There's a lot of validation going on that's needing to be tested, proofs of concept, pilot programs. And the hype itself drove a lot of awareness behind it. But at the same time, now because of too much hype, we're dealing with, you go present and talk about blockchain and people start rolling their eyes because they've heard it all. They think, they're told it's going to solve everything, all these private networks, but nothing is really, come to actually fruition for them that they've seen. So right now it's, focusing on showing that blockchain is there, but making it much more usable, because we don't want people to really get bogged down in the technological side of things. When you use your cell phone, you don't have to worry about TCP/IP and how, where the packets are going and how it's compressing and all that type of stuff. You don't care. It just works. And that's the stage we need to get to with blockchain for adoption to really accelerate.
So you're speaking to that pragmatic side of those maybe skeptical shippers out there when it comes to technology. And I think that's key. You have to be realistic with them. So tell me a little more about ShipChain and expand a little bit about that point that you just made where, you have to be practical. You have to be able to solve a real world solution and you have to make it usable. Why do you think ShipChain will achieve that?
Really, it's because we're attacking two different parts of this. One is the usability side and making a product that people in supply chain actually want to use versus attacking the technical side and making it something that actually provides that underlying value of the network itself. So we're having to do a bit of both. And it's difficult because it's never been built before. But having the underlying layer was number one. So that's what we focused on building was the actual blockchain component of it, making sure it worked, making sure that all of the details were there. And then what we built was a system called engine and transmission. So there are two different components. One, engine communicates directly with the Ethereum blockchain for document management, posting information, receiving information. And transmission is an API. It's a very simple REST API that any developer who has any experience with programming at all will be able to understand and work with, rather than requiring specialized blockchain developers, of which there are not many in the world. So as a result of that, we've opened up the developer base to be able to build on top of the ShipChain platform for their systems that they already have. So it has really expanded out. And if there's one thing that we've learned, it's when you give the developers tools, then they'll want to build on your platform. I mean, Apple has shown that with their development kit for iOS. And we heard the joke of Steve Ballmer in the 90s of developers. Well, it's completely true. So that was focus number one. But focus number two, with the actual usability side, we've built what we're seeing as kind of a control tower system where that visibility is active. And they can go in, they can see all their shipments, they can see all their documents, they can create new ones and verify everything. Very simple. You log in, you see dots on a map. But then you're able to verify the documents. If you need blockchain, it's available, but you don't have to see it.
Excellent. So when you have all of these players, one of the biggest things that's kind of popped up to me, and I'm not sure a lot of end users will know the difference or if it matters, but there's this discussion around public and private blockchains. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between the two and maybe why one is preferred over the other, or does it even matter?
Definitely. So the first blockchain ever was Bitcoin. There had been, systems like it previously, but Bitcoin was the first actual application of a blockchain, and it was a public network. It is a public network. So it allows for anyone without permission to come on, join the network, help validate, participate without requiring anyone to say yes or no, that you can, requiring approval. Private networks started evolving later on. So there's a few private networks that have really picked up. So one is called Hyperledger, people are familiar with. There's also Quorum, which is based on Ethereum. Ethereum itself is a public network, but people have taken the source and made private networks out of it. So it really comes down to part of it's a philosophy argument. So public networks, the validation there is very transparent, very easy to see. No one can keep anyone from participating. Versus private networks, there's a risk of, let's say, for instance, we've all seen the TradeLens and Hyperledger and Maersk project going on right now. There were concerns from Hapag-Lloyd, CMA, CGM that they came out and said, we would never participate in a network that's controlled by our largest competitor. And that's the issue with private networks. And that's why we've taken a stance of focusing on public blockchains to avoid those conflicts and those competitive risks.
Yeah. So you're kind of creating sort of a democratized platform in a way.
Exactly.
Where,
and so
everybody has a voice.
Right. So we've built what we're calling a side chain, and it's a secondary layer. It's a full blockchain, but it posts back and speaks with the Ethereum network itself. But it's focused only on the logistics industry. So we're calling this industry chains. And we think that's critical because you should be able to separate out transactions and information from different industries so that they don't interfere with each other, so that we don't run into slowdowns in the network, or so that, for instance, banking transactions don't interfere with shipping transactions.
Wow. Well, that's a lot of good information. And I think our listeners will be very excited to get a little more information, especially when it comes to that difference between public and private blockchains. And we haven't talked much about that. And I'm not sure most people even knew that there were different, ways of setting it up. So very exciting future in blockchain. John, thanks for having your voice and lending it to us today here on the Freight Project podcast. Just so our listeners know where to find out more about ShipChain, where can they go to get more information?
They can go on shipchain.io, and we'd be happy to help them with a demo of what we're building so that way they can visualize more than just the concepts that we talked about today.
Excellent. Well, we'll make sure I put some links here on this podcast landing page so that they can easily go check it out. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Freight Project Podcast with John Monarch, CEO of ShipChain. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks so much.